The soup trembled slightly inside the old metal thermos she carried, its warmth pressing through the cloth wrapped around it. The morning had not yet fully awakened. Addis Ababa was still stretching in half-sleep, the sky the color of ash, and the sidewalk still carrying last night's cold. Buses groaned to life in the distance, coughing smoke into the morning air. A boy ran past her barefoot, laughing to himself, while an old woman swept dust from her stoop as if trying to clear time itself. But Meskerem barely noticed. She walked slowly, both hands wrapped around the thermos like a prayer, her shoulders slightly bent from the weight of habit. This was her routine. Every morning, 6 days a week, always by 7 a.m., she walked from her one-room space in Arat Kilo to her father's small apartment in Piazza. Not far, but far enough when the weight you carried wasn't just food, but memory. She had prepared lentil soup today, shiro wat, with a touch of rosemary, garlic, and berbere, the way he used to like it. The kind of meal that had once made their home smell like warmth, like family, like something whole. She hadn't eaten yet. She rarely did before this visit. Something about feeding him first made her feel like the day could begin properly as she climbed the narrow stairwell of the aging building. She could feel the walls closing in with every step. Each stair creaked the same way it always had. 3rd floor, turn right. 3rd door, apartment 3B. The paint was still peeling near the top, exposing layers of past attempts to fix things that kept falling apart. The door had a small dent on the bottom right corner from when she was 13 and had kicked it in frustration because he wouldn't let her go to her friend's birthday party. That dent had never been fixed, just like some wounds in the heart. She knocked gently, 3 times. The sound was soft, respectful, but it echoed into the stillness behind the door like a stone dropped in deep water. No answer. She waited, counted to 10. Then used the spare key she always carried. Inside, the apartment was dim, the curtains still drawn though the sun was beginning to slip into the sky. The air smelled like old clothes and forgotten days. Dust hovered in thin golden shafts of light, like tiny spirits unwilling to settle. She stepped in quietly, setting the thermos down on the small table in the kitchen corner, then removed her shoes and walked toward the living room where she knew he would be. He was sitting by the window again, just like yesterday. And the day before. Always in that same old chair, the one he'd bought when she was still in secondary school, its arms worn down to bare wood. His thin frame looked swallowed by the faded fabric. His hands rested motionless on his lap. His eyes stared past the glass as if trying to remember what the city used to look like before everything changed. A bait, she said softly, almost, like a question, using the gentle, respectful Amharic word for father. He blinked slowly, but did not turn. She walked closer and stood beside him, letting her presence settle quietly into the room. No need to speak more than that. He wouldn't answer anyway. He rarely did now. Some days, he muttered fragments of sentences about his younger days, about a soccer match he played in 1968, about her mother who had died so many years ago. Meskerem barely remembered the shape of her face. But most days he said nothing at all, just silence. Heavy, persistent silence. She touched his shoulder lightly. His skin was warm. At least that. He was still alive, still breathing. She arranged the small table beside him and began to pour the soup into a ceramic bowl. She broke injera into pieces and placed them neatly around the edge, the way her mother used to do. The smell of berbere filled the room, rising like incense from a forgotten temple. Maybe, she hoped, maybe the scent would stir something in him today. Maybe he would say her name. She offered the bowl, guiding it gently into his hands. He took it with slow, careful fingers, as if receiving something sacred. Then he began to eat, methodically, without expression. No smile, no thank you, no flicker of recognition in his eyes. Meskerem sat across from him, watching. Not because she expected gratitude, not because she thought today would be different, but because this was her offering, this act, this moment, this quiet, daily ritual of love in a place where memory no longer lived. Outside, the city was waking up. Car horns bleated in the street. Children argued on the way to school. A vendor shouted the price of oranges in the distance. But in apartment 3B, time moved differently. Slower, softer, sadder. And then came the knock. Sharp, familiar, impatient. 3 taps and a sigh. It was her father's neighbor, Almaz, the one who always found something to say. Meskerem rose, to open the door, wiping her hands on the cloth she carried in her bag. "Ah," Almaz said, eyes darting over Meskerem's shoulder toward the old man eating in silence. "Still feeding the lion who forgot his cub?" Meskerem forced a smile. She was used to Almaz's jokes, each one shaped like a knife but passed off as humor. "She's a good daughter," Almaz added quickly, though her tone was too amused to sound sincere. "But me, I would have stopped long ago. A man can't even say, 'my daughter'? You're stronger than me, Wusha." Meskerem said nothing, just nodded politely as always, then closed the door gently, muffling the world again. She sat back down. Her father had finished the soup, and the bowl rested in his lap like a sleeping bird. He stared ahead, his expression blank. She reached forward and wiped a small drop of soup from his chin with a napkin. Then she whispered, "I remember when you used to carry me on your back after work, even when you were tired. I remember how you saved the best piece of meat for me, even when there wasn't enough for yourself. I remember the songs, the way you danced in the kitchen. I remember, even if you don't." But she didn't say it for him. She said it for herself. She stood to wash the bowl, even though there was no need. One bowl, rinsed and dried every morning, only to be used again the next. But there was something sacred in the act, the clean water, the circular motion, the soft clinking sound of ceramic. As she scrubbed the edges, she caught sight of the old kitchen calendar still hanging above the stove. It was stuck on December 2011, the year the forgetting had begun. The photo showed Lake Tana under a bright blue sky, fishermen in papyrus boats. A scene so calm it seemed like fiction now. Back then, her father's memory had only started to slip. First it was dates, then names, then whole years dissolved like sugar in tea. It had happened slowly, like dusk falling, so slow that for a while she convinced herself it wasn't happening. He'd forget what day it was, but still remember to lock the door. He'd forget her name but still ask about her work. It was the in-between time, when forgetting was a shadow rather than a wall. But now it was like talking to the echo of a man who once held the world together with his voice. She dried the bowl and placed it gently on the shelf, next to the 2 glasses they never used. One was cracked. He wouldn't notice. Still, she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Some things, even broken, held a place, just like people. From the living room, she could hear the soft scrape of his chair as he shifted. That was new. He rarely moved unless prompted. She turned the corner, her eyes falling instinctively to the spot where he sat. And for one heart-stopping moment, she thought he was looking directly at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. Her breath caught. She froze, unsure what to do. He tilted his head slightly, his brow furrowing, as if trying to place something in her face. His lips parted, a flicker of sound forming, too faint to name. "Do you want water, Abate?" she asked gently, not wanting to break the moment. He blinked. The connection dissolved. His gaze drifted back to the window. Whatever spark had kindled in his eyes just moments before had vanished like smoke. She exhaled slowly, silently. These glimpses, these almosts, were the hardest. Worse than silence, worse than absence, because they gave hope. And hope had teeth. She walked to the cabinet and poured a glass of water, placed it on the table beside him. Sat down, folding her hands on her lap. She looked around the room. It hadn't changed in years. The same plastic flowers in the corner vase. The faded wedding photo of her parents, half tilted on the wall. The rug with the burn mark near the edge from a cigarette accident long ago. This room had once been alive with laughter, arguments, birthdays, guests. Now, it was a shrine of what had been. She took out a small bag from her purse, carefully packed, and pulled out a comb and coconut oil. A simple act, but sacred. He had always taken pride in his hair, back when he cared about things like appearances. She approached him slowly, speaking softly. "Let me fix your hair, okay?" No answer, but he didn't resist as she gently turned the chair slightly and stood behind him. The comb slid through his thin, graying strands with ease. She remembered being a child, him sitting on the floor, letting her put tiny barrettes in his hair just to make her laugh. She remembered his booming voice, the way he used to call her my little storm cloud when she frowned. That man, that father, lived only in her now, not in him, and certainly not in this room. She dipped her fingers in the oil and massaged it gently into his scalp. His shoulders loosened just a little. A sign, a small one. But it mattered. Sometimes all she needed was a sign that he was still somewhere inside that silence. When she finished, she kissed the top of his head and whispered, "There, just like when I was small." He made a sound, a low, unintelligible murmur. She didn't ask him to repeat it. She didn't chase the meaning. She let it be what it was, presence. A knock came again. Softer this time. Not Almaz, a different rhythm. Meskerem opened the door and found a delivery boy standing there holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "For Mr. Haley," he said, glancing behind her. She signed for it and thanked him. The boy left without a word. She closed the door and stared at the package. Her heart fluttered. Her father hadn't received a package in years. She turned it over, reading the handwriting. It was from her Uncle Teklu, her father's younger brother, now living in the U.S. She opened it carefully. Inside was a small radio, a handwritten letter, and an old cassette tape. Her eyes widened. The label on the tape read, 1984, radio interview, Voice of Ethiopia, H. Haley. Her hands trembled as she read the letter. "Meskerem, I found this in an old box. It's your father's radio interview from back in the day. Thought it might mean something to him. Or you. Take care of him. Love, Uncle." She took the radio and taped to the corner table, plugged it in. It still worked. A soft whir, a click, then static. Then, his voice. Younger, clear, proud. "We must remember our history, not just in books, but in the way we treat one another." She froze. Her eyes darted to her father. He had turned his head. Just slightly. Just enough. His voice filled the room like sunlight through storm clouds. His old self, full of thought, full of fire. Meskerem sat down beside him, listened, and let the tears fall without wiping them away. Outside, the city noise faded. Inside, the past had found a way to speak, and even if he didn't remember her, he was still the man she remembered. The next morning, the soup was different. She had made Doro wat this time, chicken stew, slow-cooked with red onions until they melted, thickened with spice, and rich with memory. It wasn't even payday yet, but she had gone to the butcher and asked for just 2 drumsticks. "For my father," she'd said softly, and the butcher, without smiling, gave her 3. No extra charge. People in the city still remembered him. Once a school teacher, then a local radio host. A voice people trusted. A voice that guided, soothed, taught. Now, that voice sat silent by the window of apartment 3B, his thoughts lost like pages in wind. She climbed the stairs again. The same narrow path. The same peeling walls. Her fingers clutched the warm container through the towel wrap, the scent, escaping with every movement. Ginger, garlic, pepper, love. She paused before the door, listening first. The hallway was quiet. She knocked 3 times, waited, then let herself in. The smell of sleep clung to the apartment, heavy, like breath on glass. Her father was already awake, seated as always, but today his eyes were closed. She watched him from the doorway for a moment. The shape of him, the way his hands rested neatly, like he had been waiting for something. Maybe waiting for nothing. Maybe just existing. She set the food down, laid the tablecloth she kept in her bag, poured water, unwrapped the injera. Every action was slow, deliberate, like performing an old ceremony no one else remembered but her. "Abate, I made Doro today," she said gently. "Your favorite." He didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. Still, she brought the bowl to him and helped guide his hand around the spoon. He accepted it slowly, began to eat. One bite, then another. She sat beside him, her hands folded. The radio from yesterday still sat on the shelf. She thought about playing the tape again, but wasn't sure if it had been a fluke. That moment, when he had seemed to hear his younger self. Maybe it was a ghost. Maybe she was imagining it. Then came the voice she had grown to recognize. Sharp, uninvited, always on cue. Doro today?" Almaz's voice came through the open window. Between their 2 apartments. He must be a king eating like that. Every day a queen serves him food and he doesn't even know her name. Meskerem stayed silent. Almaz didn't stop. "You know what I think? I think he knows. He just pretends not to, so you'll keep feeding him like this. If it were me, I'd have gone long ago." Her voice was like gravel in a pot of honey, coarse, bitter, but coated with a smile. The kind of smile that's not really a smile at all. Meskerem stood and walked to the window. She saw Almaz outside on her small balcony, watering plastic plants, not even real ones. Meskerem didn't want to reply, but something inside her was shifting. A quiet burn, slow and warm, like the way stew thickens over fire. He was a good father, she said softly, her voice barely rising over the morning traffic. Almaz shrugged. "Maybe, but he doesn't remember that now. So what's the point?" Meskerem didn't answer. Later, as she washed the dishes again, her hands moved. Slower than usual. The water ran cold before she finished. The scrape of the sponge against the bowl felt louder than it should. Outside, the city was moving. Taxis honking, street vendors shouting, lovers arguing, children laughing. Life pulsed and continued, while hers remained locked in this cycle. Cooking, feeding, leaving, hoping, every day the same. Every morning with a fresh effort to reach someone who had long since drifted inward, like a boat untethered in fog. She remembered something suddenly. A scene from when she was 16. Her mother had just died. Her father had come home from work, opened a can of beans and sat beside her on the floor. No dinner, no talk, just the 2 of them sharing silence. Then he said, "You and I, we'll hold this house together now." That was it. No tears, just a simple promise. A sentence she had folded and kept in the corner of her heart for years. Now she was holding the house alone. And even though the house was smaller, older, filled with silence and soup instead of laughter, she still showed up. Every day. She finished cleaning, arranged the small towel over the thermos again, and packed her things. Her father had stopped eating. His head had tilted back. He looked peaceful, like he was somewhere else entirely. She kissed his forehead, whispered, "I'll come again tomorrow," and turned to leave. As she stepped into the hallway, Almaz was there, leaning against the wall. "You know I joke, right?" she said, lighting a cigarette. "It's just how I talk." Meskerem gave her a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "I know. You're a better woman than me," Almaz added, exhaling slowly. "My own sister forgot me once. Dementia, too. I stopped visiting after a while. Felt like I was pouring myself into a hole." Meskerem looked at her. For the first time, she saw past the lipstick and sarcasm, saw the grief behind the makeup, the fear in the way her hands trembled as she smoked. "It's not a hole," she said softly. "It's a mirror. You just have to keep looking in it, even when the reflection disappears." Almaz frowned, confused, but said nothing. As Meskerem descended the stairs, her body moved like clockwork, but her mind was heavy. The neighbor's words had touched something raw inside her. Not anger, but exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone who cannot love you back in the same way anymore. Not out of choice, but because the mind had betrayed them both. Still, she would return tomorrow. She always did. Because memory may fade, but love, real love, is not something you wait to be returned. It's something you give, again and again, like morning light through dusty windows, like soup passed from hand to hand, like a name whispered into silence, whether it's remembered or not. That night the power cut off without warning, a sudden gulp of darkness swallowing the single bulb that lit her room. The electric kettle clicked off mid-boil. The radio died. Meskerem sat still on her thin mattress, staring into the blackness like a child waiting for thunder after lightning. Outside, dogs barked in distant corners of the city, and somewhere nearby, a child wailed. That same high, fragile cry that reached across walls and reminded her of how thin the city's silence really was. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself, letting the quiet press in. In this tiny room, barely wide enough for her bed and stove, she had made a life, not comfortable, but contained. A gas cylinder sat in the corner, next to a half sack of rice and a bag of lentils. A single framed picture of her mother was taped above her pillow, slightly curling at the edges. It was taken at a wedding, her mother smiling mid-laugh in a green dress. That smile had been rare. Maybe that's why Meskerem kept it close. She lit a candle and sat cross-legged beside it. The shadows danced across the walls like they were trying to tell her something. Her mind drifted, not to her father, but to herself. When was the last time someone had asked how she was? Not out of formality, but out of care? Not since the illness. Not since his memory began to collapse in pieces. Even the men she dated pulled away when they realized how much of her time was already claimed. She remembered one, Dawit. Quiet, kind eyes, a good job in telecom. They had gone for coffee twice. He smiled when he spoke of his mother. But when she mentioned her father's condition, his face changed. He smiled less, called less. Then not at all. Nobody wants to date a woman who's already married to obligation. She looked down at her hands, the calluses near the base of her fingers, the small burn on her thumb from the time the stew boiled over, the faint scar on her wrist from lifting the old pot. Her body told the story of someone who carried more than her own weight. Sometimes she didn't even notice the ache in her back anymore. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. The smell of the Doro still lingered on her clothes. Berber. Onions. Memories. It was strange how certain smells lasted longer than voices. Her phone vibrated weakly. 5% battery. A message. From a former classmate she hadn't seen in years. Saw a picture of your dad on the old school wall. He was something else. Sorry about what he's going through. Hope you're okay. She stared at it for a long time before replying. Thank you. He was a good father. Still is. Just a quiet one now. No reply. She didn't expect one. Sleep came slowly. When it did, it arrived with dreams. Strange ones. She was a little girl, again, sitting on her father's shoulders as he walked through a marketplace. It was raining, and he shielded her with his coat. People passed by, faceless, voices blurry. Then he put her down and walked away. Not running, just walking. Slowly, like he didn't know she was behind him. She called after him. "A bait?" Once, twice, then louder. But he kept walking, disappearing into the crowd of nothing. She woke up breathless. The candle had burned down to a stub. Her phone was dead. The street outside was quiet again. She rubbed her eyes and tried to forget the dream, but the feeling clung to her chest like wet cloth. The next morning, she didn't cook. She boiled water and made tea instead. She stared at the pot of uncooked lentils and thought, what if I didn't go today? What would happen? Would he notice? Would anyone? The thought lingered. She sat at the edge of her bed, sipping the tea. It was bitter, no sugar. She couldn't afford sugar until Friday. Then she looked at the old picture again, her mother's smile. She used to say, "Even when your father forgets everything, he will still feel your kindness." It was a soft truth, not scientific. But it was enough. So, she stood. She cooked again. Not stew this time, just misirwat. Simple red lentils, easy on the stomach. She packed it into the thermos, wrapped it in cloth, and left her room like a shadow stepping into daylight. When she arrived at the apartment, something was different. The door was open, just slightly, not kicked in, not broken, but open, in a way that felt wrong. She pushed it gently, stepping inside with her breath caught. Her father was not in the chair. Panic swelled. Her eyes scanned the room. The curtains moved slightly, breeze from the window. The bathroom door was ajar. Her heart thudded in her ears. She walked quickly, calling his name. "Abate? Abate!" She found him in the hallway, standing, fully, dressed, shoes on. He was staring at the wall, no movement, no expression, but upright. She approached carefully. "Abate, where were you going?" He didn't answer, but he turned his head slowly, just slightly, and looked at her, and for the second time that week she saw it again. Recognition, not full, not loud, but something flickered. "Did you remember me?" she whispered. He didn't nod, but he reached out, slowly, gently, and touched her cheek. Tears rushed to her eyes, silent and warm. Then he spoke, barely audible. "Storm Cloud." Her knees buckled. It was her nickname, from years ago. A name only he had ever used. A name no one else could have known. She cried into her hands, not because it meant he was healing, not because he would get better, but because for that single moment, he saw her. Even if the moment vanished by the next. Breath, it had existed, and that was enough. The name stayed with her the whole walk home, Storm Cloud. It echoed in her chest like the low hum of a distant train, something that shook the bones before it reached the ears. He hadn't said her real name, but it didn't matter. That nickname, that forgotten slice of a past life, was more intimate than any full sentence he could have formed. It was proof, like a tiny flame still alive in a dark, soaked room. That night, she did not light a candle. She sat in the quiet with no flame, no distraction, no soft, flickering comfort. Just herself, wrapped in a shawl, the smell of berbere still clinging to her skin. She replayed his voice over and over in her mind, trying to memorize it, fearing it might slip away by morning. For the first time in weeks, she pulled out the old wooden box from under her bed. She hadn't opened it in over a year. Inside were things she told no one about, not even her closest friend from university, not even her mother's sister who sometimes called from Bahir Dar. The box held pieces of a life she didn't show the world. A photograph, folded in half, of her as a girl standing in front of her school, her father's hand on her shoulder. A gold chain, cheap, not real gold, that he had bought for her 14th birthday. And underneath it all, an envelope with handwriting that did not belong to her father. She held it like something that might bite. For a long time, she didn't open it, just stared. Then finally, with trembling fingers, she slid the letter out and unfolded the paper. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. A different name was written at the top. To my daughter, Adanek. She read it again and again. Not Meskerem, Adanek. The name her biological mother had given her. She had found the letter 5 years ago, shortly after her father's memory had begun to crack. He had been in the hospital with a mild stroke, and she had gone to the house to collect his things. That was when she found the small bundle at the back of the wardrobe. Old court papers, a birth certificate with her original surname, and a letter from her real mother. A woman she had never met. A woman who had died giving birth to her. In the letter, her mother had written, "If Haley chooses to raise you, know this. He is a man with a broken heart, but a strong spine. He may not show you love the way others do, but if he feeds you, if he teaches you, if he lets you near his books, it means he has accepted you. Be patient with him. His love is quiet, but it is real." That was the day everything shifted. Meskerem, or Adanek, had sat in silence for hours, realizing that the man who raised her was not her biological father. That the stories she believed about her mother's illness, her early childhood, were simplified versions. That he had never told her the full truth. She remembered confronting him gently, months before his mind had slipped further. Sitting beside him, holding his hand, asking, "Abate, where is my real mother?" He had paused, blinked, then said, "She had your eyes, but she had no time. That was all. No more. No explanation. No confession. Just that cryptic line. She never pressed again, because by then he had already begun drifting, and she had already decided that it didn't matter. He may not have been her birth father, but he was the man who taught her how to tie her shoes, the man who read to her in bed, the man who stood silently at her university graduation in a borrowed suit, eyes full of unspoken pride. So she had chosen to stay, to cook, to care, to remember, even as he forgot. But now, after hearing him call her storm cloud, she wondered, had he known all along that she wasn't his? Had he known, even in the fog of forgetting? The question sat heavy in her stomach. She folded the letter and placed it back into the box. Then, with deliberate care, she removed the folded photograph of the two of them, young Meskerem and proud Haley. She looked at it under the low light. His face was different then, fuller, his smile sharp. She was wearing a red backpack. She turned it over. There, in faint blue ink, were the words, "My storm cloud, my strength." She gasped. The handwriting was his. All these years, she thought he called her that just once or twice, a nickname that faded. But he had written it, marked it, claimed her. In his own way, in his own language. She pressed the photo to her chest, closed her eyes, and breathed. It didn't matter what blood connected them. It didn't matter what papers said. What mattered was the years. The long years of quiet, care, small gestures, daily rituals. Those were real. Those were truth. That night, she fell asleep with the photo still in her hand. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't dream of losing him. She dreamed of finding him again. Not the man from the past, but the man who lived in the in-between. The man who forgot names but remembered how to hold a spoon. The man who didn't say, "I love you," but still took the soup bowl every morning, as if by instinct. A man who had remembered enough to call her storm cloud. The following days passed like mist, soft, slow, ungraspable. The city moved around her, indifferent, while she moved through it with deeper stillness. She no longer expected recognition from her father, but now she understood something truer. Recognition had never been the point. Her return, her devotion, her quiet labor. These were not about receiving, but about continuing. Holding the thread, even if the other end had gone slack, she still cooked each day. Not because she hoped he would know her, but because she knew him. That week, she made kikalicha, soft yellow split peas cooked with turmeric and garlic. She chose it because it was easy to swallow, gentle on the stomach, but also because he used to hum while eating it, a strange habit he didn't know he had. She had always teased him for it. As she stirred the pot in her small kitchen, the radio played quietly behind her, a young man speaking about heritage. He said something. That struck her. Memory is not just what we carry in the mind. It's what we choose to repeat, even when no one else is watching. She turned off the radio, stood for a moment, letting those words echo. Then she packed the food with her usual care, tying the thermos in the faded blue towel, the same towel, from her school days when he used to wrap her lunch in it. She could still remember the notes he used to write. Study well, storm cloud, come home safe. As she walked the familiar path to his apartment, she passed a small street market she usually ignored. But today, something pulled her to it, a stall with old cassette tapes and radios. She saw a radio almost identical to the one her uncle had sent. The man at the stall noticed her interest. Old models, he said. But sometimes they remember more than people do. She smiled softly. Do you have any music from the 70s? He handed her a cassette labeled Tilahun Gesese, Love Songs. She bought it. At the apartment, the door was unlocked again. Not unusual now. Her father had started wandering inside the house, never far, just pacing from chair to chair. A rhythm of someone trying to remember where he put the past. She found him sitting on the floor this time, legs stretched out, back leaning against the wall. He looked peaceful, almost boyish, like the years had been peeled away. He held a spoon, in one hand, no food, just the spoon. She didn't ask how he got it. She just sat beside him. She placed the thermos down and didn't speak for a while. The silence between them had grown familiar, like an old friend who visited often but never overstayed. Then she stood, walked to the radio, and inserted the new tape. A soft click. Then static. Then a voice, Tilahun's, smooth and rich, pouring into the room like melted gold. Her father turned his head slowly, and then, something she hadn't seen in months, he smiled, not fully, just the corner of his mouth lifting. But it was real, not accidental, not muscle memory. A smile. She blinked hard, then took the bowl and poured the soup. As he ate, she sat near the window, watching the sky shift its colors. She thought about all the things he'd forgotten. Her first day of school, the name of her favorite stuffed bear, her graduation, her heartbreaks, her long nights crying into the pillow when he didn't ask what was wrong. But she also thought about what he'd done, without memory, without fanfare. The way he still held the spoon, the way he still listened to old music, the way he smiled at the sound of Tilahun. These were fragments, yes, but also foundations. He had built her a life, brick by quiet brick, even if he couldn't now name the walls. Almaz knocked later that day, not loudly, just once. When Meskerem opened the door, the older woman stood, with a small tin of roasted barley in her hand. I made this for him, Almaz said awkwardly. I don't know if he eats it still, but, well, you know. Meskerem took it, surprised. Thank you. Almaz looked past her into the apartment. Her eyes softened. "I heard music," she said. "Old songs. He still knows them." Almaz leaned in a little. "And he still knows you?" Meskerem didn't answer right away. Then, with a small, calm voice, she said, "He doesn't need to. I know him." Almaz nodded slowly. Her eyes were a little shiny, but she wiped them quickly. "You're a rare girl," Meskerem smiled. "No, I'm just a daughter." That evening, she sat with her father on the floor. The cassette played on. One side ended. She flipped it over. Music again. Time again. A cycle of loss and finding, forgetting and remembering, giving without expecting. At one point, he reached out and touched her wrist. His hand was warm. She turned her head, searching his eyes. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. There was presence. That was enough. Later, as she packed up to leave, she noticed the old wedding photo on the wall, the one of her parents, tilted as always. This time, she walked to it, straightened it, wiped the dust from the frame. It looked clearer now, like it belonged. She kissed his forehead gently before leaving. "I'll come again tomorrow," she said. He didn't reply. But as she closed the door behind her, she heard a sound. Soft, fragile. "Storm." She paused, waited. No, more words came, but she didn't need them, because in that half-formed syllable she heard it all. The rains came early that year, not the thunderous downpours of July, but the soft, unsure drizzle that touched the skin like breath. Addis Ababa wore gray that morning, mist clinging to buildings, street dogs curled under benches, and distant taxi horns sounding like tired sighs. People moved quickly, shielding themselves with jackets, plastic bags, umbrellas with bent spokes. But Meskerem walked slowly, as if the rain were part of her. She carried the thermos under her shawl. No injera today, just tea with ginger and a piece of honey bread wrapped in cloth. She didn't feel like cooking. Her hands were tired. Her body was heavier than usual, not from illness but from something else, something quieter. Like when a wall doesn't crumble but leans just enough to make you notice. When she reached apartment 3B, she paused at the door again. A long pause this time. Her fingers brushed the peeling paint near the handle. She noticed something strange, a faint smudge of oil on the wall about shoulder height. His shoulder. Maybe he had leaned there recently. Maybe he had wandered again, touching the wall like it could guide him back to something. She entered without knocking. Inside, the apartment felt stiller than usual. Not silent, just paused, like it was holding its breath. He wasn't in the chair. He wasn't pacing the hall. She set the thermos down, her movement slower now, listening. Then she saw him, not fallen, not hurt, just asleep on the floor, curled gently under the window, a blanket pulled halfway over him. He looked peaceful, like a child after play. His breathing was soft, regular. She knelt beside him, brushed his hair back. He didn't stir. The radio, which she'd left playing overnight by accident, was still on. A quiet station playing Orthodox hymns, slow and drifting. It filled the room like prayer. She let it play. Let the moment breathe for the next hour. She stayed near him. She didn't wake him. She didn't feed him. She just sat. She thought about how many times she had walked this same path. How many times she had wondered whether it was worth it. Whether love given in silence was still love. Whether showing up for someone who might never say thank you was still an act of meaning. She reached into her bag and pulled out the old photograph again. The one with "Storm Cloud My Strength" written on the back? She stared at it, then looked at the man sleeping beside her. It had been years, years of routines, of quiet hurts, of near miracles. years of seeing him become someone else. And yet her love had not shrunk. It had deepened, not in joy, but in duty. Not in recognition, but in remembrance. Suddenly, she heard the doorknob twist. It was Almaz. She stepped inside without waiting. She held a folded umbrella in one hand and a small bag of kolo, roasted barley, in the other. "I brought this for him," she said awkwardly, then froze when she saw Meskerem on the floor. Is he all right?" Meskerem nodded. "Just sleeping." Almaz exhaled, then stepped further in. She stood for a moment, then slowly lowered herself onto the opposite chair. A rare moment of stillness from her. For a while, neither woman spoke. The rain tapped softly against the window pane. Then Almaz leaned forward and asked, "Why do you keep coming, Wusha?" Her voice was not mocking this time. It held the raw tone of someone who truly didn't understand. Who wanted to. Meskerem looked at her for a long time, then turned toward her father. "He forgets me," she said softly. "But I remember him." Almaz didn't answer right away. She sat back, eyes scanning the room, her face unreadable. "That's a hard kind of love," she said eventually. "Too hard for me?" Meskerem offered a tired smile. "Not really, it just stretches. It changes shape." "Doesn't it hurt?" "Every day." Almaz looked down, rubbing her knees. The sound of the hymns from the radio filled the silence. Then, surprising even herself, Almaz said, "When my sister forgot me, I stopped visiting. I thought maybe I was the only one still holding on. I told myself it was foolish." Meskerem reached for the tea and poured some into a small cup. Handed it to Almaz without a word, they sipped in silence. Time passed. Her father stirred slightly. His hand twitched. His lips moved. Meskerem leaned in. He mumbled something, a whisper lost between sleep and waking. She caught only one word. Home. Her throat tightened. He hadn't used that word in years. Home. Not a place, not a building, but maybe her. Maybe her presence, her soup, her voice. The rain began to fade. Light slipped through the mist, and in that moment, it became clear. He might never fully remember her name, her birthday, or the years she spent caring for him. But he remembered something. Not details, not facts, but feeling. That quiet comfort when she entered the room. That warmth in the scent of Berber. That steadiness in her touch. And that was enough. It didn't need to be more. As the morning sun began to stretch across the room, Meskerem stood, folded the towel, and packed her things. She kissed her father's forehead again. "I'll come again tomorrow," she said, as always. He did not respond, but Almaz, now sipping the last of her tea, looked up and said, "I believe you." Meskerem gave a small, knowing nod, then stepped out into the softened light, where the air smelled of rain and rosemary. Her walk home was quiet, but inside her chest, something had settled. Not closure, not victory, but peace. Because even if the world forgets, even if minds fade and names vanish, love remembers.